Russia's President Vladimir Putin had expected that Ukraine would fall within days of the invasion. The plan was to capture Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. That expectation has turned out to be at odds with reality because the war has waged on for over a month. Mr. Putin thought that installing a Russian-controlled regime in Ukraine would be quick and easy, but Russia made some avoidable mistakes, and up to 10,000 Russian soldiers have been killed so far. Despite those failings, the will to capture the Ukrainian capital is as immovable as the tanks, trucks, and troops stuck in their 40-mile convoy. In this video, we are going to talk about why Russia's logistics have failed in Ukraine so far. Watch this video till the end to find out why. Also, if you enjoy economics content, consider subscribing or liking the video. I spend a lot of time researching these stories and only a small percentage of my viewers are subscribed. It's free and you can unsubscribe anytime. When we are talking about Russia's logistics, what we are really talking about is the way that they are supplying the front line. So that refers to things like ammunition, weapons, fuel, food, supplies, uniforms, and also the resupply of fresh troops going to the front line. A lot of the soldiers have been on the front line. The problem is you need to feed those people and you need to resupply them, and that's where the logistical call comes into its own. Transportation is dependent on rail lines. The Russian military, more than any other force in the world, relies on railways for the movement of its troops and for the maintenance of its supplies. Rail is the most efficient option. But the problem is that Russia doesn't have enough trucks to take the supplies that they need from the railways to the front line. So that makes it difficult to penetrate further into Ukraine. And it means that if those trucks break down, or if they are targeted, which the Ukrainian military is doing, then they can't get the fuel, the supplies, they can't get the people they need to the front line for the war effort. And that is why Russia is struggling. The sheer size of Ukraine is also a problem. Trucking takes a lot of time, and traveling long distances becomes really challenging because they're trying to push a large force down some narrow roads. And it's not just one trip. Supply trucks and other support vehicles have to constantly go back and forth. Trucks moving along supply lines need protection, especially if travel options have been narrowed to a few predictable roads. But early on, Russian troops didn't execute the basics of convoy escort, which involves armored vehicles and soldiers traveling with and defending vulnerable logistics vehicles. Supply vehicles were sometimes left on their own, even after the Ukrainian military advised citizens on social media to attack unarmored fuel trucks. Since the invasion began on February 24th, Russia has lost more than 2,000 vehicles, including more than 300 tanks, according to open source reports. The Ukrainians destroyed and captured some, others were simply abandoned. Some of the tanks were generations old and not well equipped, including the T-72, a Soviet-era tank that first encountered production more than 50 years ago. Vehicles are exposed to a great deal of damage during military operations. Combat vehicles travel off-road, on dirt roads and gravel roads that constantly shake everything and literally shake things apart. The sub-zero temperatures don't help either because the vehicles get frozen entirely. It's highly unusual for armored vehicles, including wheeled trucks, to break under an intense operating environment. That explains why we've seen so many photos of abandoned Russian autos. The Russians not only left logistics units behind, but they also failed to protect them with infantry or air cover. That created opportunities for the Ukrainians to take them out and cut off the units out in front. Russia's command structure also seems to be failing. They have 4 structures coming from 4 different regions of Russia. A single unified chain of command would make life a lot simpler, but they've not got that. Stark evidence of the faulty chain of command is that at least 15 senior Russian commanders, including 7 generals, have been killed, according to the Ukraine Defense Ministry. Typically, such high-ranking officers would not be anywhere near the front lines, but they've had to go further forward than normal to impose order and direct operations at the lower levels. Many Russian troops in the south appear to be professional soldiers who have been deployed in Crimea, but elsewhere, especially in the north, Russian forces appear to have many soldiers who may be less motivated and less well trained. And it appears that orders for the invasion were kept secret from the troops. The very troops who were going to carry out Putin's invasion plan didn't know that they were actually being sent to invade Ukraine until the very last minute. This brings up the point of mindset and motivation of the troops. They weren't fired up, as they would have been if they actually believed they were being sent into a full-blown war. Communication was disrupted when Russia was in the process of bombing cities such as Kharkiv. Russian forces destroyed cell towers needed by their own secure network. They were forced to use unsecured lines that were easily intercepted. One Russian general was reportedly killed in an airstrike after the Ukrainians located him by his cell phone signal. Lack of weaponry has also been a major problem for the Russians. Capturing cities is an extremely bloody, time-consuming operation. Urban terrain favors defenders who know the territory, and it provides endless places to hide and opportunities for ambush. It also forces an attacker to use an enormous amount of ammunition. Most likely, few people outside the Kremlin know how many missiles, rockets, and artillery shells Russia started with, or how many it has used to bombard Ukrainian cities. All countries keep their military stockpiles secret. A Pentagon official said Russia appears to be running low on precision munitions such as guided missiles, and Reuters reported that those missiles have a failure rate of up to 60%. On the other hand, an important part of military planning is how you treat and transport your wounded soldiers, ideally within the first hour after trauma. There have been reports of inadequate medical support for Russian troops. Cynthia Cook, a military logistics expert, talked about this, and she said, "You know, one of the many horrifying things about this whole war is the idea that Russia would not be prepared to adequately support their soldiers in terms of their medical needs." On March 23rd, a NATO official estimated that between 7,000 and 15,000 Russian troops have been killed since the invasion began in late February, and many more have been wounded. So many that the Pentagon said Russia is pulling in reinforcements who are deployed elsewhere. Russia has been bogged down by its logistical problems, but Ukraine's resistance also deserves some credit. The Ukrainians have been solid under pressure. Ukraine is currently fighting a considerably bigger opponent. Russia has a total of 900,000 active military personnel. Ukraine's active military is significantly smaller in comparison to Russia, with just 196,600, made up of 125,600 ground troops, 20,000 airborne, 35,000 Air Force, and 15,000 Navy. The entire size of Ukraine's military is equal to what Russia had on the border at the start of the invasion. The odds were stacked against Ukraine from the beginning, but they understood that population centers like Kharkiv and some of the military facilities would be Russia's key targets, so they have defended fairly well at the strategic level so far. Ukraine's planning, motivation, and tactics has exposed the shortcomings of Russia's military. The will to fight is a defining factor. Ukraine doesn't want to be an occupied nation like Belarus. On the ground, Ukrainians know how to approach the situation during combat because it's their territory and they know it better than the Russians. While fighting professional forces was a problem for Russia, they also came up against relentless coordinated attacks from civilians, which means the Russians not only have to fight the Ukrainian forces that are there, but also have to fight the armed volunteers who conduct attacks the whole time. Ukraine has been dominant in the air as well. Everyone knows about the adventures of the Ghost of Kiev. Recently, a fuel depot was ablaze at one of Russia's main logistics hubs in Belgorod, a Russian city near the border. Moscow has described it as a cross-border air raid by Ukrainian helicopters, but Ukraine has neither confirmed nor denied responsibility for the huge fire at the fuel depot. Meanwhile, heavy shelling and missile attacks from Russia continue to damage Kyiv, as well as other major cities like Kharkiv and Mariupol. More than 1,100 civilians have died, and more than 4 million people have been forced to flee Ukraine. On paper, Russia may have a military advantage over Ukraine, but the reality has not been as obvious. This is a new humanitarian crisis, and the devastation is far from over. Do you think Putin will give up, or is he not going to stop until he wins? Let me know in the comments below. And if you learned anything new from this, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon to be the first to see our new videos. I make deep dives like this every week where I uncover the secrets of money, business, and global economics.